Welcome to the channel as we start another story from the Creepy Tales playlist. In the darkness, stories take shape. Some are whispered from the shadows. Others echo from places you should never go. These are the echoes of the unknown. Tales of horror, suspense, and fear that lingers. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones you can't explain. The ones you don't want to know exist. Let's begin. Jenna's laughter echoed through the misty forest, her voice light against the weight of the trees. Ryan grinned, adjusting his backpack, the dirt path winding beneath his boots. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, the scent crisp and clean. This was supposed to be an escape, a break from work, from noise, from everything. Just two friends, hiking the dense trails of Black Pine Mountain. But the mist thickened as they climbed, swirling around the trunks like pale fingers. Jenna paused, her brow furrowing. "Is it supposed to be this foggy?" she asked, but Ryan just shrugged, pulling out his map. "The higher we go, the mistier it gets. Just means we're almost to the overlook." But the overlook never appeared. The trail twisted and forked, then seemed to narrow, the trees pressing closer. Shadows stretched beneath the twisted branches, and the wind whispered through the leaves. Jenna shivered, glancing back. "Feels like we're being watched," she muttered. Ryan chuckled, but it was forced. "Just your imagination. Come on, we're not lost." But his eyes darted nervously at the thickening mist, and in the quiet, something rustled in the shadows, a soft, slow movement just beyond sight. The sky grew darker, the sun swallowed by thick gray clouds. Jenna's phone showed no signal, her battery draining faster than it should. "We should turn back," she whispered, her voice tight. But when they tried, the path seemed different, twisting in new directions, the trees dense and leaning closer. Ryan's map was useless now, the lines blurring in the damp air. The forest was silent, too silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just their own breathing and the dull crunch of dirt beneath their boots. But something was there. They both felt it, an invisible weight pressing against them, following just out of sight. "Did you hear that?" Jenna whispered, her eyes wide. Ryan shook his head, but his pace quickened. "Come on. If we just keep walking, we'll hit a main trail." But the mist thickened, curling around them like a damp, gray curtain. Shadows shifted just beyond their vision, twisted shapes that seemed to flinch away when they looked. Jenna's heart raced, her fingers curling into her sleeves. "This isn't right, Ryan. We've been walking for hours." His voice was tight. "Just keep going." But his own breath came faster, his eyes darting to the trees, where something seemed to move, always just out of sight. Dusk fell swiftly, the world swallowed in gray. Just as Jenna's panic peaked, they stumbled upon it, a cabin, half hidden in the mist, its wooden walls twisted and weathered with age. The roof sagged, thick with moss, and the single window was clouded with dirt. "Thank God," Ryan breathed, sprinting to the door. "There might be someone who can help us." But when he knocked, the door swung open with a slow, aching groan. The darkness inside seemed to swallow the light. Jenna hesitated, her feet rooted to the forest floor. "Ryan, maybe we should keep going." "Into the dark?" he snapped, his voice tinged with fear. "We're already lost, Jenna. This is shelter." He stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath his weight. Jenna followed, the air inside cold and stale, carrying the faint, musty scent of damp wood. The cabin was small, one room with a rotting table, a broken chair, and a dusty, cracked mirror hanging crooked on the wall. Ryan found an old, rusted lantern on a shelf, his lighter's flame struggling to catch the wick. But when it finally lit, the light seemed weak, barely pushing back the shadows. Jenna stood by the window, staring out at the misty forest. She swore something moved between the trees, something tall, dark, and thin. But when she blinked, it was gone. The night settled heavy and cold. Jenna huddled beneath her jacket, watching the lantern's weak flame sputter. Ryan was already asleep, his back against the wall, but Jenna's eyes wouldn't close. The forest outside was a pale, swirling void, the mist pressing against the window like a fogged glass. And then she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. A slow, distorted murmur that seemed to slither through the darkness, brushing against her ears. She sat up, her breath catching. "Ryan!" she whispered, but he didn't stir. The whisper continued, a slow, dragging voice that seemed to come from all directions. Jenna's hands trembled, her gaze fixed on the window, where the mist thickened. Shapes twisted in the fog, but she couldn't make them out. A faint, wet scraping sound echoed from the roof, like something dragging against the wooden beams. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Ryan!" she hissed, grabbing his shoulder. He jerked awake, his eyes wild. "What? What's wrong?" "Listen," she whispered, but the cabin was silent now. Only the weak hiss of the lantern and the faint rustle of wind outside. Jenna's voice shook. "There's something out there." Ryan rubbed his eyes, shaking his head. "It's just the wind, Jenna. Go back to sleep." But his voice lacked conviction. He lay down again, his eyes flicking to the window, but Jenna stayed awake, her gaze locked on the mist. Pale light seeped through the mist, a gray dawn that bled through the forest. Jenna's eyes were heavy, but she hadn't slept. Ryan yawned, stretching, trying to shake off the stiffness. "We should head out early. Find the main trail." His voice was calm, but his movements were rushed, his backpack already slung over his shoulder. But outside, the mist had thickened, a pale, shifting wall that seemed to swallow the trees. Jenna's voice was thin. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Ryan forced a smile. "Doesn't matter. As long as we're moving, we'll find something." But every path they took seemed to loop, the forest an endless maze of gnarled branches and twisted roots. Jenna's breathing quickened. "Ryan, we're lost again." "We're—" A branch snapped behind them, the sharp crack echoing through the mist. They spun, but saw nothing. Just a pale, swirling fog. But then Jenna saw it, a shadow twisting between the trees, a shape too tall, too thin, its dark form melding with the mist. "Run!" Ryan whispered, grabbing her hand. They sprinted back, the forest seeming to close in, the trees stretching and twisting. But the cabin appeared again, its crooked walls dark against the fog. Jenna hesitated, but Ryan dragged her inside, slamming the door. The lantern still burned weakly, but the air felt colder, and the faint scent of damp earth was stronger. "We have to wait out the mist," Ryan muttered, but his voice was thin, his eyes locked on the window. Jenna's voice trembled. "Something's out there. Something's following us." The day bled into a murky twilight, the mist never lifting, clinging to the trees like a cold, wet shroud. Jenna sat by the dying lantern, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes fixed on the window. The pale, gray light outside twisted and flickered, shadows dancing in the fog. Ryan paced the cramped cabin, his face pale, his fingers twitching. "We just need to wait for the fog to clear. It has to clear," he muttered, but his voice was thin, cracking at the edges. Jenna didn't respond, her gaze locked on the mist beyond the window. And then it came again, the whisper. Faint, a slow, slithering murmur that seemed to wind around the cabin like a snake. Jenna's breath caught, her fingers digging into the damp, rotting wood beneath her. "Do you hear it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Ryan stopped, his eyes narrowing. "It's just the wind." But he didn't believe it. He stepped closer to the door, pressing his ear against the warped wood. The whispering seemed to come from everywhere, above them, below them, pressing against the walls. The lantern's flame flickered wildly, the shadows stretching. Jenna leaned forward, her voice barely a breath. "It's louder! It's getting louder!" Ryan's hand gripped the lantern, his knuckles white. "We can't stay here. We have to." A heavy thud struck the roof above them. Jenna screamed, stumbling back. The whisper twisted into a low, distorted groan, and the air grew colder, the shadows pressing in. Night wrapped around the cabin like a suffocating shroud. Jenna huddled by the corner, her eyes darting between the window and the door. The whisper never stopped now, an endless, distorted murmur that seemed to rise and fall like distant breathing. But now it was joined by something else, a faint, rhythmic scratching. It started at the far wall, a slow, deliberate scrape that moved toward the door. Ryan grabbed the broken chair, brandishing it like a weapon, his breath coming in short, frantic gasps. "It's just branches. It has to be branches," he whispered, but the fear in his voice betrayed him. But the scratching grew louder, clawing at the wood, circling the cabin. The lantern's flames sputtered, shadows leaping across the walls. Jenna's pulse hammered in her ears. "It's outside! It's trying to get in!" Ryan stepped toward the door, his voice cracking. "Who's there? Who's out there?" But only the scratching answered, a slow, scraping sound like claws raking against the wood. The window rattled, and Jenna's breath caught as she saw it, a dark, twisted shape moving just beyond the glass, a pale, crooked limb pressing against the fogged pane. But then it was gone, melting into the mist. The scratching stopped, and for a brief moment, there was silence. Jenna's voice was a choked whisper. "Ryan, it's playing with us." Jenna woke with a jolt, her cheek pressed against the cold, damp floor. The lantern had died, leaving the cabin in suffocating darkness. Her fingers fumbled for the matches, her breathing rapid. But as she struck a flame, a faint glow filled the room, just enough to cast long, stretching shadows against the walls. "Ryan?" she whispered, her voice thin. But the cabin was silent. Her heartbeat thundered as she crept to the window, her trembling fingers wiping away a patch of fog. At first, she saw nothing, just the swirling mist. But then, something moved. A dark shape twisted between the trees, impossibly tall and thin, its limbs bending in unnatural angles. Jenna's breath caught as a pale, crooked hand reached out from the fog, pressing against the glass. Her scream choked in her throat. The hand was gnarled, with too many joints, the fingers long and sharp. Then it was gone, retracted into the mist, the forest swallowing it. But the fog pressed closer, and she heard the creak of the roof, slow, deliberate. Heavy footsteps shuffled above, the wooden beams groaning. Jenna stumbled back, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Ryan! Wake up!" But the dark corner where he had been sleeping was empty. Jenna's breaths came in short, frantic gasps as she slammed the door shut, her hands shaking as she dragged the rotting dresser in front of it. The cabin was freezing now, the air thick with a damp, earthy scent. "Ryan!" she screamed, her voice cracking. But there was no answer. Just the creaking above, the slow, heavy steps dragging across the roof. Then the door shuddered. The dresser shifted, the wood groaning. Something was pushing against it from outside. Jenna's knees buckled, and she grabbed the lantern, her fingers fumbling with the matches. A spark flared, but the flame was weak, barely illuminating the cabin. The door creaked again, bending inward. The frame warped, the rusted hinges straining. Jenna backed away, her eyes darting to the window, where pale fog pressed against the glass. A dark, twisted shadow shifted beyond, tall and hunched, moving slowly. "Please, please, leave me alone," Jenna whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. The door bulged, splinters cracking, and then it stopped, falling silent. The air grew still, thick with a suffocating weight. Jenna pressed herself against the far wall, the lantern's weak flame dancing. But then the window rattled, and a pale, crooked limb dragged across the glass, the mist swirling around it. The scratching returned, circling the cabin, slow and deliberate. Jenna's sanity frayed with each passing moment. Time seemed to stretch, the mist never lifting, the pale light never fading. She clawed at the walls, searching for any other way out, but the cabin was a trap. The door bent inward but never broke. The window rattled, but whatever stalked outside never entered. It was playing with her. Her thoughts twisted in the suffocating darkness. "Ryan did this. He brought me here. He's part of it," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking, fingers digging into her scalp. "I should have never come with him." But when the cabin fell silent, when the scratching stopped, the loneliness crushed her. "Ryan?" she whispered, her voice weak, desperate. But only the cold, misty air answered. The lantern died, leaving her in darkness. Her knees gave out, her back against the wall. Please! I just want to leave. A soft, slow creak echoed outside. Jenna's pulse spiked, her eyes locked on the door. But the silence returned, thicker now, pressing against her ears. Shadows danced against the window, twisted shapes swaying in the mist. She closed her eyes, rocking gently. It's just the wind, just the wind. But the forest outside was silent. No wind. No rustling leaves. Just the cold, dead mist, pressing against the cabin. Jenna's breath came in ragged gasps as she finally forced the door open, stumbling into the mist. Her shoes sank into the damp earth, and the pale fog coiled around her legs, clinging to her like wet sheets. Ryan! She screamed, her voice swallowed by the still, heavy air. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, the twisted pines looming, their branches clawing at the sky. But then she saw them, strange, twisted symbols carved into the trees. Spirals, jagged lines, claw marks etched deep into the bark. They were fresh, the sap still dripping. Panic clawed at her as she moved, her fingers trailing over the cold, wet carvings. They weren't random. The symbols seemed to point, always toward her, always facing the cabin, always following her gaze. Jenna's voice trembled. No, this wasn't here before. She stumbled, nearly tripping over a gnarled root, her eyes wide. The mist seemed thicker, the symbols multiplying, twisting in new shapes. Her breathing quickened. Ryan! Please! Where are you? But only the cold silence answered. She ran, her footsteps muffled by the damp earth, her desperate gaze darting between the trees. But the symbols were everywhere, always appearing just ahead, always facing her. And then she heard it, a faint, slow rustling, like leaves dragging across the ground. But there was no wind. Ryan! Jenna's voice was a broken cry now, her throat raw, her vision blurred with tears. The mist pressed closer, suffocating, and the shadows twisted around her. She stumbled, catching herself against a tree. Its surface was cold, slick, and she jerked back. The twisted symbol on the bark seemed to pulse, shifting beneath her touch. A branch snapped behind her. Jenna spun, but the mist was thick, swirling. Dark shapes shifted within it, tall and crooked, swaying like twisted reeds. Stay away! She screamed, her legs trembling, but the shadows only drew closer, silent, patient. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she ran, the ground uneven, roots twisting beneath her feet. Branches clawed at her arms, her cheeks stung with scratches. But the forest stretched on, endless, the mist swallowing the trees. Jenna! Her heart froze. A voice, faint, distant. Ryan's voice. She spun, eyes wide. Ryan? Ryan! But the mist seemed to warp, her own voice echoing back, distorted. A shape moved toward her, tall, thin, too dark to be human. Jenna turned to run, but her foot caught, and she fell. The mist closed in, and the shadows swallowed her. Her scream was sharp, then muffled, then gone. Silence settled, the mist swirling gently. Ryan's breath came in panicked gasps as he staggered through the mist. His flashlight flickered weakly, the pale beam swallowed by the cold fog. Jenna! He shouted, his voice a desperate rasp. But there was no answer. Only the silent, oppressive forest. But then he saw it, something moving between the trees. A dark, twisted shape, hunched and crooked, its limbs too long, bending at unnatural angles. Ryan stumbled back, the flashlight beam quivering, and for a heartbeat, the light caught it, a pale, eyeless face staring from the mist, a gaping mouth that twisted and stretched. His scream caught in his throat, and he turned, running blindly. The mist clung to his skin, the cold burning his lungs. But the trees twisted around him, leaning closer, their branches clawing at his clothes. His foot caught on a root, and he tumbled, his flashlight skittering away. The darkness thickened, and he heard it, slow, dragging footsteps, the crunch of leaves beneath something heavy. Panic surged, and he clawed at the earth, pulling himself forward, his fingers digging into the cold, wet soil. A shadow loomed above him, too tall, too thin, its limbs twitching like broken branches. Ryan's breast shuddered, his voice a thin, broken whisper. Please, please! But the shadow only leaned closer, its gaping, eyeless face twisting in the mist. Ryan's voice was gone, his throat raw, his limbs numb. The mist pressed against him, cold and heavy. But somehow, he found it again, the cabin's twisted shape rising from the fog. The door hung open, the interior shrouded in darkness. He stumbled inside, slamming the door, his back against it. Silence. Only the pounding of his own heartbeat, the chill settling into his bones. Jenna, he whispered, tears stinging his eyes. I'm sorry. I couldn't. But then he saw her. Jenna stood in the dark corner, her back to him, her figure faint in the shadows. Relief washed over him, a sob escaping his lips. Jenna! Thank God! I thought I lost you. But she didn't move. Didn't speak. Jenna? He whispered, stepping closer. But something was wrong. Her outline seemed blurred, her figure swaying gently, like smoke caught in the air. Jenna? Her head twisted slightly, too far, too sharply. And then her voice, faint, distorted, a hollow echo. He's here. The door behind him shuddered, the wood groaning. Dark shapes twisted against the window, clawed shadows scraping at the glass. The air grew cold, thick, the smell of damp earth choking him. Ryan's legs buckled. No, no, please! But Jenna's shape only twisted, her form dissolving, melting into the darkness. Days later, the mist finally cleared, the pale morning light spilling through the pines. A search team made their way through the forest, their radios crackling, the wind cold and sharp. Last reported location was around here, one of them called, pushing through the dense brush. And then they saw it, the cabin, its roof sagging, its wooden walls twisted with age. The door hung open, a faint, cold draft seeping out. The searchers exchanged uneasy glances, their boots crunching against the damp earth as they stepped inside. The cabin was empty. No sign of Jenna or Ryan. Just their backpacks, their shoes, Jenna's phone, dead, its battery drained. One of the searchers leaned down, picking up a damp, crumpled map, the ink smeared. Looks abandoned for years. One muttered, his voice tense. But then another searcher spoke, his voice low, wary. What the hell are these? Carved into the walls, the twisted symbols stretched in chaotic spirals, their edges dark with something like ash. Outside, the trees bore the same marks, always facing the cabin. The wind stirred the mist again, a pale, swirling ghost around the trees. One of the searchers felt a chill, his gaze drifting to the tree line. For just an instant, he thought he saw a shape, a tall, twisted figure, pale and thin, watching from the mist. But when he blinked, it was gone. Only the silent, shadowed pines remained, standing in cold, oppressive silence. Next time you're home all alone, and you hear those things that go bump in the night, sometimes they are best left alone.